going to go ahead and start. Sorry, so crowded. If you don't have a copy of the presentation, I'm making more copies now. Does anybody have a copy of Phyllis's presentation, the first one that was here? Raise your hand if you need a copy. And we're making more. If there's a seat next to you, will you raise your hand? I know. There's some seats over here. Anybody else? Yeah, I'm going to give you more time. Okay, thanks you guys for squeezing in. All right. Happy New Year, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Hello. Hi. This is just for you. I'm making more copies of the presentation. All right. I trust that everybody had a relaxing New Year, hopefully. I just got back from 2 weeks in Asia. So it's like another day there right now, and I'm still trying to figure out what day it is here. My daughter is in 6th grade, which is why I'm so interested in everything Phyllis has to say, is making her way to school every day in 12-hour time difference, so I figured she could do it, I can do it, right? But youth is on her side for sure. So if I haven't introduced myself, I'm Debbie Rosen, and this is Lindsay Tom. She's our center director. I'm a founder and owner of the Study Room. I want to welcome everyone here. How many people are here for the very first time? Welcome. We're so glad that you're here. You're in for a special treat. The way that our presentations go is we talk a little bit at the beginning about Study Pro, about what we do to inform, and then we introduce Phyllis. And so we wanted to share, because we're in this unique position where we actually did so much work at the end of last year. We have a lot of really exciting programs ready. And so we wanted to share with you many of the programming, as you know, everything we do is free. And so we want to share all of that. And then some of the things do help pay the rent and keep the lights on. And so we want to share some of those as well. As you know, I think we are a study skills center. And so that's founded on the belief that there are a lot of really super smart kids out there, even though we don't love to use that word smart, kids that aren't necessarily meeting their potential, mostly because it's really a process issue versus them not understanding the content. And process is, how do I plan, how do I manage, how do I keep up with my work, how do I break down my work, those types of things. And so what we really do here is we help them in 3 ways. We start by teaching the foundational skills. So one of my friends, when I first started the center, said to me, you know, it's interesting because you can go to school every single day and they can teach you all about math and history, but where do you really learn how to learn? And I thought that's a great question, because at least when I went to school, I feel like there was more how to take notes, you know, how to break things down, how to plan out papers. And I know we do get some of that, but there's not really any end-to-end system of how to manage work. And I noticed that with my children, who are, one is 20 in college and just starting to figure it out, and one who's in 6th grade, when you're starting to get cumulative tests and you're starting to have to understand information over long periods of time and then remember it and regurgitate it, no one's really taught us how to do that. You know, how do we organize the information, the different tests and different assignments we need so that we can go back and study it effectively? And how do we get them to buy in? How do we get our kids to buy into the fact that they really do need to do that over time? Because all the data will tell you that studying in short bursts over time, right? Our school friends, professionals are nodding their head, but studying over time is really what's going to help convert that from short to long-term memory. So we actually provide a study skills course and workshop, which we talk about. One of the things that we do that we think is very neat is here in the homework center. You're sitting in the homework center. We usually don't have so many kids. We'd love to. It's not as crowded when the kids are in the homework center. But what we really want to do, and one of the challenges I noticed with my own son was that even if we can have a plan, it's necessary not just making the plan, it's working that plan. and getting that plan to come to fruition. And what we all want, usually, is for our kids to get their homework done. And so what we do in the Homework Center is to try to take the impediments away from the students by helping sit with them and plan. And make sure that they're able to have a sense of what they need to do, in what chunks, in what order. And then because we don't tutor, but because we have support in math, science, and language arts, if they get stuck, there's not really, again, that impediment for perseverance. And so because they're also with everybody else that are their peers, it's helpful because then they're not sitting home alone with all those other distractions. Not to sound like you have to send your students here to do that, but it's nice for kids who take our class and also get a Homework Center as part of that, to use the Homework Center and to see, well, you know what, if I'm in this kind of environment, almost with those blinders on, how much more I can get done. I remember, again, the first time my daughter came here, she was jumping up and down. She's like, wow, she's not that efficient at home. And just having that type of environment is important. And then personalizing the skills with coaching. So some students do need that extra help. And just like in sports, you can practice, you can know the rules, but sometimes you do need that extra coaching. And that's one of the things that we really do here. We're super excited because we did just launch an active study strategies workshop. And the reason we launched this is because even in our course, which is the 5-week course, we do teach active study strategies. But we launched it because what we really wanted was for kids to come for one afternoon, and right now this is offered, we're going to get too excited, for 6th to 8th graders. We are going to be offering for 9th to 12th graders later in the spring. But for 6th to 8th graders, we wanted kids to come and to really experience what it was like to take information and to translate it and to manipulate it in a way that would make it more memorable for them. And we wanted to be no theory, but just hands-on information. And so what we're going to do is, in practice, and what we're going to do is, Linda's going to share a little bit of what that is, and then these may be some things you can try at home as well.
Can you hear me okay? I'm trying not to mess up my hair, so but it's just like Debbie was saying, like one of our goals here is to help students plan for a test, and wherever we were seeing them stopping is, oh, I put the test on my calendar, I'm planning, like I'm ready for that test, I have it that it's on Friday, I know it's on Friday. And that is a first step for a lot of our kids. They need to even know when it's going to be. But then I think part of my job as an executive function coach is to annoy my children and annoy my students. And part of that annoyance was to ask them how they were going to study. And it was like this mind-blowing question. Oh, well, I'm going to study. What are you talking about? Of course I'm going to study for my test. And every time I kept asking how, I was finding that we all were finding that they were just stuck with how to answer that question. It wasn't that they didn't want to study. It's not that they were trying to avoid studying for that test. That's what we might assume. But they really did not know how to actively study. If they did have an answer for that question, it was reread my notes, look over my notes. Have you as parents found that answer when you asked them how are they going to study for a test? So what we wanted to do is both give the parents and students language that can help them answer that how they're going to study. And it should be active. It should be something that you can see. So the phrase that we're using all the time is it's something I should be able to see. So you're making something, you're creating something, or you're doing something. So you should hear verbs in the language. I'm going to make a diagram. I'm going to label a diagram. I'm going to draw a timeline. If they're using some of those words, they're way more likely to be active with their study. They're way more to be invested in what they're doing if they're creating something. If they're just completing the study guide that the teacher gave them, they're not really being active in their study. So some of those examples, we just want to go through how to make it creative, how to make it active, and then how to make it purposeful to what they're studying. So we just teach them different active study strategies and when it might be useful. So when might matching be useful, when might sequencing be useful, when might charting be useful, when might diagramming be useful. So when they do get a study guide from their teacher and it's just a list of terms, which start happening in middle school, you stop getting those elementary study guides are like actual question and answers, right? Then in middle school, it just starts becoming like lists of concepts and lists of terms. But the teacher might say something like, describe the causes of, or describe the effects of. They might not give them the answers on that study guide, but if they have some of those, they can key in that they can use something like a T-chart or a diagram or actually have something upholdable. And so the idea is that we just want them to move from this passive and understand what passive studying looks like. That it's rereading my notes. It's just highlighting with no purpose at all. Just highlighting the notes without having any kind of key or categorization going over their notes. We want to give them an actual plan for that. And then by doing this, it actually makes it easier. We ask the students all the time is, why do you not like studying? And it might be, it's boring or it's hard. It's like these two ends of the spectrum. It's either too boring for me or it's too hard for me. So by using some of these strategies, it helps it being more engaging, but it also helps it make it a little bit easier. But also, so they have these tools, and then the last one is the buy-in. That they actually see the effects, that they see why it's useful to use some of these tools, right? When you're creating something that you know, when you put your hands on it, when you are the one designing or creating something, you're going to retain it more than somebody else giving you the information versus just to sit and guess. And by rereading, you're just sitting and guessing. So those are the dates coming up. Our next one is going to be January 26th. And so as Debbie was saying, it's in the afternoon, 1 to 4. It actually kind of flies by. I was thinking, like, middle school, we're throwing them out there for a little while, a big chunk of time, but because they're hands-on, up, moving, and creating the whole time, it really does fly by.
So I just wanted to share very quickly before we introduce Phyllis a few things that we are doing. This is a free workshop we're doing. We're very lucky to have Dr. Dan Shapiro. He's written his second book, and he's going to be doing a 2-hour lecture and book launch on managing ADHD medications. All this is on our website. We have Dr. Andrea Brenner, who's here with us today. She was our speaker. Did anyone see her last time? Yes, a little bit of a different age crowd, but Andrea was here, and we're actually doing a workshop on these 2 dates that are up here on how to prepare and transition your child to college. So we're super excited about that. Again, it's on our website. We have a lunch and learn next month that's on your left. All about how to help children with self-esteem. Has anyone seen Rachel Bailey? I know many of you. She's amazing. She's someone who will have back every single year. And she's doing her parenting group again, which has been really popular at the study bureau. And then finally, as Lindsay said, we're starting our essential study skills courses and our writing courses for the winter, all of this on the website. And then the same thing for the 5th graders, which is a little bit more growth mindset oriented and study skills that are appropriate for 4th and 5th graders. So with that, one thing that really resonated with me when I saw Phyllis speak at Langley School, which is where my daughter goes to school, is, you know, the truth is that as our students and as our children move into middle school, we all get a little bit nervous about, am I doing things right? You know, how do I push in when they're pulling back and they really want to have a lot more independence? And I think that by listening to Phyllis, it's just gave me a lot more confidence. Some things I thought I was doing well, some things I think I can do, certainly keep improving that same growth mindset. Phyllis was one of our very first presenters when she wrote in the Washington Post. She has an article, 2 articles written today that are published in the Post. One's in the lifestyle section of the Post, which I'll let her talk a little bit about, and one that's an article.
Q&A with
Q&A. Yes, the Q&A. So anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Phyllis and give her a warm state for welcome.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
So, wow, this is a really good crowd. I wish I had had that kind of a course when I was growing up. I was definitely the disorganized middle school student who had maybe, 2 sets of papers and 2 sets of backpacks. And even as an adult, I wonder how much better organized I would be today had I tackled all of that when I was 12 instead of trying to figure it out now. I actually have a 6th grader myself. and I also have a senior in high school and a junior in high school. And I actually went to Theyre this week recently, so I think it's funny that you're here to learn about middle school, because I went to go learn about how you deal with your senior in high school who's about to go to college. I have been asking a question lately just because I'm curious more than anything else. How many of you had a really positive middle school experience, like highlight of your life? Really good memories? One? Maybe a few others? So I think that's part of the problem with middle school. I was talking to my editor at the Post earlier today, and she was saying that, so she was talking to somebody who was talking about middle school parents, and we used the phrase anxious middle school parents, and she said that's redundant. That anxious middle school parents are redundant, which I thought was great. And I think some of that is that we bring our own memories to the table, and they're not that positive. And then we have this whole negative cultural rhetoric and movies like Mean Girls, and all that does is feed into this idea that middle school is this time to dread. And then on top of that, we are getting a lot of mixed messages. Maybe in elementary school, it felt like we were welcome in the classroom. We knew how to volunteer. We knew our kids' friends. They also knew how to walk to school. And then suddenly when they go to middle school, they're getting on a bus, probably. They're joining forces with lots of different middle schools in some cases. They're interacting with students we don't know. We suddenly know that they have 7 teachers or 5 teachers, and we don't know exactly how we're supposed to interface with them and how much we're supposed to help them when they don't do their homework or when they're struggling socially. And then we have these kids who are signaling loud and clear, I want my independence, I want my autonomy, I want my privacy. And you add all of that together, and what we end up with is a group of really insecure parents who don't know really what to do and what their role is. And the problem with that is that of all ages across the span, and I've done counseling from kindergarten through 12th, I would say middle schoolers need their parents more than any other age. They just need us to get in there in a much, much different way. I'm going to talk about what I mean by that as we go through these slides. So why are the tween years so important? I love middle school. I mean, I really love middle schoolers, but I love this phase because it's so low stakes. This is a great time to learn how to manage your papers and how to self-advocate and talk to your teachers and how to deal with conflict and how to try lots of different things that you may not be good at. You get to do electives. Suddenly, when you go to high school, it's so much more constricted. It's harder to try new things. You can't just play soccer. People have been playing soccer forever, and you can't necessarily make a team. So in that way, it's low stakes. It's a great time for experimentation. But it's also high stakes if we don't get in there and teach them certain core skills for a lot of reasons. First is this is a phase where their confidence and their creativity take a nosedive. So we know that their confidence drops about 30%, and among girls in particular, their confidence that people like them between ages 8 and 14 drops 46%. Which is crazy. I like to joke, when I watch the kids outside doing sports or whatever, if a girl lets in a goal, even if it's the defense who really made the error, she's going to start worrying that everyone will hate her, that it's her fault. If a boy lets in a goal, it could be totally his fault, but it's like the wind in a sunny way. So girls are just much, much harder on themselves during this phase. There's a famous creativity test called the Land Creativity Test from a while back that shows that their creativity also drops about 30% during this phase. I feel like we have method acting. I feel like I'm doing method writing about middle school and working with middle schoolers because I got braces. So I might be drinking more, and I got them on the back. Don't ever do that. It's a really bad idea. So we know that. And then moving on to their mental health. Have any of you heard some of these statistics lately that the suicide rate has doubled between 2007 and 2014 among 10 to 14-year-olds? Mental health problems are spiking, and clearly something is changing and something is not going right. And there are a lot of different theories about that. But I'm going to talk a little bit later about what we can do to support them through this phase, particularly since tweens are especially bad at recognizing the difference between the normal fluctuations of puberty versus anxiety or depression. They're really bad at knowing how to ask for help or when to ask for help. So I'll talk about that a little bit too. And then the last reason this is such a critical time to get in there and stay involved with your kids is because they're forming their identity and they're solidifying their values. So once they hit high school, a lot of that is, it's not that it's set in stone. You can still influence your high schoolers, but middle schoolers are this really magical mix of malleable and impressionable, and they care what we think, but they're also intellectually sophisticated and can really make connections. There's an activity that I love to do called the values card sort. Has anyone done the values card sort? You can find it online if you Google values card sort. You can even buy a deck of cards from Amazon, or you can just print it out and cut them up. What I do, and I'll do this with students in small groups, but I really recommend doing this at home. It's great for us too, as adults. You can compare it in the family. It's about 100 values. It's everything from compassion, generosity, ambition, competitiveness. You know, everybody's going to have different values. They're not all sense of humor, safety. And you ask your child to rank them, to find the top 10 out of those 100 values, and then to rank them in order. And then once you've done that, you can talk about them. You can talk about the ones you picked so that they can hear what your values are as well. And then the point of the exercise, when it really comes in handy, is whenever they're in a situation and they're not sure what the right thing to do is, and we all know middle schoolers are really impulsive, to stop and ask themselves which of these two decisions is more in accordance with my values. So their values might change, but just having that set of core values in the back of their mind as guiding principles as they're going through this phase. Common myths about the phase. I mean, for number one, I could tell about 1,000 different stories, but I'll start with a few. I will say that right before I came here, I had 5 girls in my office, and they were all mad at each other. I mean, it was so confusing because they were each mad at somebody else in the room, but it wasn't 100% clear at first who was mad at who. What I finally was able to figure out is that one child had been invited to a party with one of the other kids in the room. So there were 2 kids in the room who had not been invited to this party, and 3 who were planning to go. And one of the girls who was invited to the party had told the 2 who were not invited, hey guys, guess what you were not invited to? Which, you know, is not really a kind thing to do, and it caused some issues, and it really upset everybody in that room. So now that we're all here in this room, you know, what are you thinking as you reflect on what happened? She said, well, even as the words were coming out of her mouth, I thought to myself, this is not the right thing to do, and I shouldn't be doing this. And I said, so at that, when you stopped talking? She goes, no, if I had stopped talking, then I wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. So I thought that was, you know, quintessential middle school. A story that I have told my students, and this was a parent who called me. She was really upset because her daughter was out in the neighborhood, or her daughter's friend was out in the neighborhood and heard 2 of their friends in the street talking and saying really mean things about this friend who is not there. And so this girl who was friends with both of them, the 2 who were talking about her friend and the friend who wasn't there, decided that her friend should know what these people were saying about her, you know, that she was a loser and had no friends, you know, lovely things. So she decided to secretly videotape them. And then because she was such a good friend and because she thought her friend should know who she should trust, she sent the videotape of the girl saying things to the friend. Now we all know that was not a good idea. That's like an adult. As adults, we know not to do that. And this mother was flabbergasted. She's like, now how am I supposed to do this? It's like, who does that? Like, who does that to their friend? And should I say something? And how do I help my daughter? And, you know, I said to her, I completely understand where you're coming from. And as crazy as this sounds, I really don't think that this girl intended to be mean. I think she really, truly believed at her core that this was the right thing to do. And to test my theory, the next day I happened to be in a 6th grade classroom, and I asked the kids, how many of you think it was right to secretly videotape the friends? They all raised their hands, every single one of them. And then I said, how many of you think it was the right, kind, loyal thing to do to then share that information with her friend? Every single one of them raised their hands. I was like, this is going to keep me in business forever. So, boys too, all of them. Yeah, the boys also, every single one of them felt that the loyal thing to do was to alert their friend that these other kids had been saying mean things about them. I think there are adults who would make that mistake, who would pass along. So we had a conversation, and when you're talking to middle schoolers, it will never work to just tell them how they should behave or what they should think. So you have to be a little bit indirect and say things like, well, tell me the pros and cons. What are the pros of telling her that these kids are saying this about her? What are the cons? And by the end of the conversation, in which I was trying to get them to think a little bit more critically and come to some of their own conclusions, they realized it was just spreading the meanness and that they could have spared her the pain because there was nothing that she could do about it at that point. Because, you know what, sometimes people do have private conversations where they say unkind things about people, but they weren't doing it in order to hurt her. It might have been a blip in time and they might have felt differently 15 minutes later, but now this kid is feeling that way forever. So they were able to put it all together, and by the end, they had a more nuanced understanding of what it means to be kind. But it wasn't something that was intuitive, and I think that's something we all have to keep in mind when we're coaching our kids, that none of this comes to them intuitively for the most part, and things that we think through our lens are meanness really has to do with a lack of skills and the fact that their empathy is still developing. And unfortunately for them, as their empathy is developing at a time when they're also trying to figure out if they're good enough and they're all insecure, so they're misinterpreting feedback left and right, and looking for reassurance from people who are insecure themselves, which doesn't always get them the results that they want. The second one is they're embarrassed by you. They're not embarrassed by you, they're embarrassed to be with you. There's a distinction. There really is a distinction. And I'll share a story that a student told me. She's now about 16, but this is from when she was in 7th grade. And she was invited by 8th graders to go to the high school football game with them. And she was so excited that they had invited her because that meant that she was going to be hanging out with older kids and she would be feeling a little more sophisticated. And she went home and she told her parents that these 8th graders had invited her to this football game. And her father goes, "Great, I'm gonna go with you." That's gonna be so much fun. Mom and I will come with you. And she was like, "Do not do that, just drop me off." And he sort of listened to her a little bit, and he agreed that he was going to go to the game, but he wasn't going to sit with her. That was kind of the compromise that they came up with. So he brought her to the game, and she's on a hill with 8th graders, and he is theoretically off in the stands somewhere when he comes gallivanting up, and he comes up to like the group of kids, and he just said, "Just wanted to come over and say hi and introduce myself." And she was nice to him in that moment, and he got really mad, and later on they ended up having a huge fight. And when she was sharing this story with me later, she said, "I wish he had understood. I wasn't embarrassed by him. I really just wanted to feel grown up, and he was making me feel like a baby by showing up in that moment. I wish we could have just had an agreement in retrospect where I said, I'm going to say hi, and that will be good enough for you, and then you'll keep going." She didn't want to hurt his feelings. So the next method is that I had a fight with my own 6th grader yesterday, or an argument anyway, where I said, "You're going to use my bathroom. Could you please put the toilet seat down when you're done?" And he said, "I didn't use your bathroom." Right. We're the only 2 people in the house. Who uses the bathrooms? So, sometimes it just boggles my mind the things that they decide are even worse arguing about. Here's what's going on when they're arguing here in line. So arguing in line are slightly different issues, and I'll start with arguing. If they're arguing with you, this is a sign of respect. This is actually a really positive sign, because I mean it. It means that they want to know what's going on in your head. They consider it a constructive, productive exchange. It's actually when they stop arguing with you that you have a problem. with my oldest son, I remember he would tell me, he would argue over nothing, and then one day he wasn't arguing at all, and so then I poked a little closer to see what was going on with his plans, because I just had this sense, and sure enough, he was not being as forthcoming as he had been at other times. But the main thing is that they want to know what you're thinking. Yes, they might then rebel against what you believe, but they're still internalizing it, and it's to them a very, very effective way to find out what is important to you. So arguing is a sign of respect. Remember that. Tell yourself that. Lying is really complicated. It's so complicated at this age that I have a complete chapter on lying, because when kids lie when they're young, they're lying because of fantasy or wishful thinking, or it's just a figment of their imagination and a manifestation of their creativity. Maybe they want to, cheat to win at a board game, but it's not especially complicated with little kids. When you start hitting the middle school years and kids are lying, that's when you want to really dig deeper. Put on your scuba diving suit and go under the water. Why are they lying? When are they lying? Collecting information. Is it because they're struggling in class and don't want to admit that they feel incompetent? Is it because they want to fit in with a certain peer group? Is it, is it because somebody else had cut them down to size and they wanted to appear, more popular or more anything? And so once you figure out what is beneath the lie, you can try to address that need. Do they need extra support? Do they need an outside activity that might expose them to a peer group that might be more accepting? And when they do lie, and this is complicated too, you want to make sure that you don't lump together the lie and the transgression. So if they break a vase and and it was an accident, but then they lie about it, be very clear. The consequence here is for lying about it. Had that happened as an accident, I would have asked you to clean it up. But I'm imposing a consequence, and it can be something logical if they lie about saying where they're going to be and they go someplace else. It might be that there's more scrutiny of their texts or more follow through or limitations on where they can go independently. But you don't want to lump them together, because you really at this age want to be teaching them the value of honesty. So in the book, it's divided into 4 different sections, and it kind of goes from the inside out. I start with character and integrity, and then I move on to social skills, and then I move on to learning, and then finally empowerment and resilience. And at the beginning of each chapter, I talk about which of these 10 skills will be addressed within that chapter. And these to me are the skills that I think kids really, middle school kids really benefit from focusing on the most. It will help them the most as they hit high school and beyond. And I'm going to go through them. I've gotten into trouble where I've gotten so in depth that this ends up being the last slide, so hopefully that won't happen today. The first is make good friend choices. And this is so challenging for parents to watch kids. We know in an instant when they're making a really bad choice. When it's a kid who every time they're with them, they end up throwing hamburgers in the cafeteria and getting sent to the principal's office, or somebody who's a fair weather friend, sometimes nice to them, sometimes not. I heard a story from a local psychologist. A girl was friends with a couple of girls who were having a sleepover, and she wanted to go. And they didn't invite her on this sleepover, which was painful, but they told her that she could watch the sleepover on Instagram Live. I know, it's so bad, it's so bad. And the mother didn't know, father didn't know, and this girl really wanted to fit in with these kids, and so she was going to take what she could get, and she was willing to do this. So she was streaming into this sleepover that she wasn't invited to and watching people have fun without her. And that would get old, and so her attention would drift, and she would go off to do something else. And the girls, every time they saw her losing attention and walking away, they would do something off screen or subtly say her name to draw her back in. Excruciating as a parent to see your child be willing to subject themselves to that. And so this parent was beside herself and wanted to know, what can I do to get my daughter to not be friends with people who would treat her like this? And this is one of the challenges of parenting in middle school, where you really can't make them do anything. But what you can do is you can show curiosity and ask a lot of questions, getting them to think a little bit more analytically about whether it's working for them. You can also use phrases like, I've noticed, or I'm wondering, I'm wondering whether this friendship is sustaining for you, or if this friendship feels reciprocal, if it feels like they're giving you as much as you're giving them, or I've noticed that when you're with this friend, you smile all the time, but when you're with these two friends, it seems like you're always on edge and you're not really yourself. So you really want to get them to a point where they realize that they're sacrificing themselves, or they realize that they need to shift friend groups. It does happen eventually. A statistic that I think is really reassuring is that if you map out friendships from 7th grade to 12th grade, and a researcher in California did this whole social networking thing, you'll find that only 1% of friendships make it from 7th grade to 12th grade. 1%. So I actually think that's reassuring in a way, because if you don't like your kids' friends or the wrong choices, odds are it's going to work itself out anyway. And we don't want to be telling them they can't be friends with someone because they're just going to rebel, and we want them to learn those skills. It's a really, really important life skill to know who you should surround yourself with and who makes you feel happy. The second is negotiate conflict. And this is another big one for middle schoolers because they all want to be in on the action. A middle schooler once said that the worst thing about lunch is that the best story wins. It's always like everybody's trying to either get the most sympathy or the most oohs and ahs over what they've done. And it's hard to teach kids this age how to not become part of a negative drama that doesn't involve them. And so this is the time when you want to be talking about who's at the core of the drama. Who do you need to engage with? Does this involve you, or are you just curious? And is this something that you need to be a part of, or is this likely to cause more problems for you? And I do a lot of work in the school setting with kids around this. And what you find is that they don't actually want the drama. They just don't have the skills. They don't know how to extricate themselves in situations. They don't want to be left out. FOMO is real. That fear of missing out is very, very real at this age. The third is manage a student-teacher mismatch. And that's going to happen. Sometimes they're going to get a teacher they don't like, and the instinct might be to call the school and try to get them in another class, but someday they're going to have a boss they don't like. Someday they're going to have somebody that they're working with. It could be a colleague, and we want to be focusing on helping them manage these relationships. I had a student who was sure her teacher hated her. Completely sure her teacher hated her, that she never called on her, that she graded her more harshly than other students in the class. And I said, I will come observe the class. I won't say why I'm there. And then I'll report back to you, and we'll problem solve from there. And I went in several times, and every single time I saw no evidence of favoritism. I could see no evidence that this teacher did not like this child. And I called her back in and I said, help me understand, because I'm not discounting what you're saying, but I'm not seeing it. And it turned out that earlier on in the school year, she had asked for an extra point on a quiz. And in that moment, the teacher had looked annoyed. She probably was annoyed because it felt like grade grubbing for the teacher, and it was irritating. The teacher then promptly forgot about it and did not hold it against the student. This girl held on to that micro moment, for weeks and weeks and weeks. And the solution wasn't to take her out of the class and put her in a new class. The solution was for her to have a few lunches with that teacher, to have a conversation with her and try to work it out. So to the extent possible, your teachers want to have good relationships with your kids too. So if something like that is going on, really try to dig under the surface. And it might be that you have to help them manage a different temperament or a different personality type. And it might be that they are misinterpreting the feedback, and middle schoolers misinterpret feedback 40% of the time. They're really not good at reading what other people think. It's why when you're talking to them, you have to be non-reactive and have a poker face, because if they're going to err on one side or the other, they're going to assume that you're judging or criticizing them. That's just where they're going to go. They're going to go right to the negative. And it's true for teachers, it's true for parents, it's true for their friends. The next is to create homework and organization systems. You're in the right room for that. If you can do that now, and I was listening to Lisa DeMoore talk, I don't know if anyone was at her talk not that long ago at school in DC. She was talking about how in middle schools, when you really want to make sure that you're not just focusing on the kids who are disorganized or who need help with those executive functioning skills, but that you're also focusing on the perfectionists, you know, the kids who, when the teacher says make 200 cards or make 40 cards, will make 200 cards, because while that might serve them in middle school when the demands aren't particularly high, as they get older, if they haven't learned how to study strategically, the load is going to increase to the point where they can't manage it. There are a lot of things you can do with homework and organization. The one that I'll mention today has to do with the parent-school relationship. And I say this as an educator and speaking on behalf of almost every educator I've ever spoken to. They don't want you fighting with your kids at home over homework. If homework is becoming a battle, that's when you want to sit down and you want to email the school and let them meet with their kid and come up with a plan. It might be that they meet with all of their teachers at the end of the class for a few minutes. It might be that they have to be in a resource period or have an extra homework club. But if you're in that place where you're fighting with your kid over homework, there's either something wrong with the homework, or, which is possible, you know, there's a guy named Rick Wormley who studies homework, and he had a son who really struggled with fine motor skills. And the science teacher had given an assignment where the kid had to suspend things from the top of the shoebox. And he was spending an inordinate amount of time trying to suspend things from the top of the shoebox and getting really, really frustrated. And in that case, the father helped the son go back to the teacher and say, is there another way for me to demonstrate my knowledge? Because this is not critical to my understanding of science, and it's creating a tremendous amount of stress. So you do want to take a look at what's getting in their way, and there might be something the teacher can do to modify the work. But if it's becoming a battle between the two of you, it's not worth it. Email the school and set it aside and let them help. The next is consider others' perspectives. And this has to do with embracing differences. Middle schoolers are so intolerant of any difference, particularly in themselves. And that's why I love to focus on this at this age, because if you can teach them that everyone is deserving of being treated with dignity and respect, then they're going to internalize that they too are worthy of being treated with respect. And some of that has to do with instilling a sense of pride in their identity. You know, we're talking about family traditions, we're talking about the history of your family name, or little stories and anecdotes that help them really connect. And it also has to do with exposing them to other cultures and to other people. It could be that they volunteer with the Special Olympics, or that you're doing something that helps move them from a place of fear to understanding. But if you can pull that off in middle school, that will go so far toward helping them feel a positive self-identity. 6 is self-advocate. And this is a hard one. And requires a lot of scaffolding. I'll use emailing a teacher as an example. You really want, so when your child comes in 6th grade, they're going to have no idea how to self-advocate. But by the time they go to high school, and certainly beyond that, you're going to want them to know how to get help, how to know when they need help. So with the email example, especially with kids texting so much now, they may not even know how to do a proper citation. They may not know how to say please and thank you. So the first time you do it, you want to sit down with them, you write the email with them next to you. Once you feel they're ready, then you would have them write the email, but you're sitting next to them and making sure that it looks fine and that they're asking for, working out of time to see this teacher as an example. And then the next step would be that they do it all on their own. And at each step, once they're able to do it on their own, you don't ever want to do it for them again. You want to pull away that support. This one is a big one. I could do a whole talk on self-regulating emotions. Kids in middle school have no idea that feelings are not who they are. So if they feel jealous or if they feel angry, they think that that is a negative reflection on their character. We want to be really explaining that no feelings are bad. Feelings are just feelings. Everybody has a full range of feelings. In fact, it's protective to have a range of feelings. And they can control their behaviors. They also don't know that feelings don't last forever. They don't last at the same intensity, that they can come and go. And they have no life experience, no perspective, and they really have no coping strategies. Ask your child to list their coping strategies, and they really don't know. It's why we have so many kids in middle school doing things like cutting or maladaptive coping strategies. They're just trying to feel better, and they don't have a better idea. So what you want to be doing is, first, helping build their emotional vocabulary. And one of the ways to do that is to, when you see them having an emotion that's recognizable to you, to name it for them and label it for them. I can see you're frustrated. I can see you're disappointed. And you want to be mixing up your language so that they're understanding that there are gradations of emotions. It's not just happy, sad, angry. And there are even feelings wheels that really can go through everything from disgust to excitement, all of it, if you need to bolster your own emotional vocabulary. And then once you have labeled that for them, particularly if it's a negative emotion, you can then start talking about strategies to feel better. And one thing that I talk about with kids is that the same coping strategy that works for one situation won't necessarily work for another. So a child who is really stressed about test taking, in that situation, the strategy might be to take a few moments and just collect themselves and sit by themselves. But in a situation where they're upset about a friendship situation, they might be better off talking it through with somebody and being really lovable and unloading it. And I explain that emotions are like a train going through a tunnel. The only way out is to go all the way through, whether you're crying, writing, whatever somebody's doing. So then once you start identifying what strategies work for them, you want to actually write it down. I like to use wooden craft sticks and popsicle sticks and have a jar. And the kids can write it down. I went for a walk, I got a glass of water, I took a few deep breaths, I called a friend, or if it's for the child who's embroiled in some emotional or social drama, calling a friend might just heighten their anxiety, and in that situation, they might be better off listening to music. But just starting to get a sense of what works in different scenarios and then writing it down. Another way to do it is to put it on index cards that they can store in their binder. But you're normalizing looking for ways to make yourself feel better. You're normalizing the negative emotions and explain that emotions serve a purpose. So if you're sad, that might be a sign that you need some support and to ask for help. So that emotion is speaking to you. The next is cultivate passions and recognize limitations. So this is when a lot of kids, maybe they played soccer for 1,000 years, or lacrosse for 1,000 years, or they played violin, or they did some activity when they might suddenly come back and say, I don't want to do that anymore. A common question I'll get is, should I let my son quit this, or should I let my daughter quit this activity? And over time, my feelings about this have really evolved. I say 90% of the time the answer is yes, if not more than 90% of the time. If they have an obligation to a team, or if you paid for a series of lessons, you can have them finish and to meet that responsibility. But I don't think we want to be sending the message to middle schoolers that they have to do something they don't like at any cost. For a lot of reasons, we're really then transmitting the message that they'll carry into adulthood, that when they're in a bad situation, bad work situation, a bad relationship, that they must stay and finish it. And I'm not sure that that's the lesson that we want to be sending. I think the lesson we want to be sending to our kids is that they should be using this time to explore their interests. And they're not going to be good at everything, and that's okay. Nobody is good at everything. In fact, it's probably a blessing if we're not. The kids who are good at everything or seem like they're good at everything often have a harder time finding their direction later. So, really talking to them about how, and I use the word passions there, but I like that phrase that Susan Cain uses, which is big likings. Passion feels like a lot of pressure to really, really love something. But what we're looking for is for just that little flame, that there's something that's starting to catch their attention, and then we as parents can fan the flame. And there will be times when your kids come home and they're really into something that you think is absolutely bizarre, and you can't really understand it. Go with it anyway. Just go with it. If they're really into insects, go to learn all about insects at the Smithsonian. But just teach them to really follow those moments of passion, because, and I'm going to skip around a little bit to number 10, because that's really what's going to allow them to grow up to be creators and innovators. And I think part of the reason it's stressful to raise kids today, whether it's middle schoolers or college students, is we don't really know what they're going to need to be successful in the changing economy. It used to be that good grades and the right college, I put that in quotes, would set them up for, a bright future. But the world is changing so rapidly, and half of the jobs that existed when we were going through middle school don't even exist anymore, and that's going to continue at that same pace. And we really want them to be focusing on things like flexibility and adaptability and being able to pivot as needed. So by teaching them now to run with their interests, they're going to be more likely to be able to figure out what it is they'd like to do later on. And then going back to the make responsible, healthy, ethical choices, this is another one that's great to focus on in middle school. One of my favorite strategies is from a man at Dartmouth College, a researcher who studies inoculation theory. Has anyone heard of inoculation theory? So the way inoculation theory works is that you can preemptively prime your child to make a good decision. So for example, I'll use gossip. You can do this with vaping, you can do this with anything else. I'll do vaping as a counter example, gossip. When you are in a situation where somebody is gossiping, where you have good gossip or someone is gossiping, you're going to want to be part of it. It feels fun to be in the know. It's exciting to have the best story and to feel like you have something to offer your friends. But do you know what feels even better? This is the inoculation part, like inoculating against the flu. It feels even better to be known as somebody that everybody can trust, somebody who is a loyal, trustworthy friend. So what you're doing with inoculation theory is you're telling them what the challenges that they're going to face and what that temptation will be and why it will be difficult. And then you're offering a compelling counter-argument. So vaping as another example, and that's something that they're going to be exposed to at some point, if not already. You're going to be at a party, or you're going to be in the school bathroom, and you're going to see kids vaping, or somebody might invite you to vape with them, and it might be somebody who you really kind of want to impress, or somebody who's part of a group that you want to be in, and also they might tell you, or you might think that because it's fun flavors that it's not dangerous and that it can't harm you, but here's why it can. And here's what with middle schoolers in particular, an even more powerful argument is to tell them that the advertising companies are trying to manipulate them, because middle schoolers really don't like people to try to pull one over on them. But again, it's just explaining what those temptations will be, explaining why it will be hard, showing some empathy for that, and then offering this compelling counter argument.
Hit the back button.
Okay. How to stay connected with tweens. So this goes more to communication. First is start with trust. And actually research shows that if you start from a place of trust, will rise to your expectations. So if your kid is generally where they say they're going to be when they say they're going to be there, assume all is well and give them more leeway. Give them start from a place of trust. You really only want to be reining them in if they're in a situation where they're violating that trust. Second is to talk above their age maturity level and even intelligence. You're better off with middle schoolers treating them as if they're a little bit older and even more sophisticated and capable than they are, than to treat them as if they're younger, because you get what you give with middle schoolers, and if they sense that you respect them and that's what that conveys, then you're going to get that respect in turn. Third is to make sure your tone, words, and body language match. And this goes back to this idea that they're so bad at interpreting feedback. If they even think in advance that their parents might not like that they got a C on a test, from the moment they have that conversation with you, they're going to be assuming you're going to be critical and upset. And so if you say to them, that's fine, but you take 2 full minutes to say that, and you're just quiet when they first hand you that test, then they're going to sniff out that inauthenticity. So you want to make sure that you're not, stiff as a board, or that your facial expression isn't too reactive, or they're going to shut down. The next is to find time to relate, not just to teach. I love a story that a girl told me about being in a car with her father on a day when they both liked indie music bands, and they both wanted to introduce each other to the same indie music band in this car ride. They just coincidentally had discovered it at the same time. So relating is when, teaching is when you're telling them what your expectations are for them, behaviorally, academically, chores. It's also when you're telling them what your values are, what you, the things you learn from over the years. All of that's important, but we as parents tend to spend about 95% of our time doing that. Relating is when they are the expert, when you are giving them the opportunity to teach you something. It's when they are telling you, what's important to them, or what makes them tick, or even asking them to show you how to do something. Several years ago, I was nervous about a presentation, and my daughter loved to give presentations, and so she downloaded an image of an opera house, a full-packed opera house. She put it in front of me, just in front of this opera house. She was in 7th grade at the time, and she was so pleased with herself that she was able to offer me help. And nothing will make your middle schooler happier than you saying to them, asking them for advice, talking to them about something that they could help you with. And then this last one is don't focus solely on high-yield conversations. And several years ago, a girl she's now a junior in high school, but at the time she was in 7th grade, she had just transitioned from one private school that she had gone to through 6th grade, and she had moved to this new one in 7th grade. And part of the reason she made the transition was because socially it wasn't the best match. But at the beginning of this school year in 7th grade at this new school, she sort of felt like she was between two worlds. She had some friends from this old school, and she had some friends at the new school, and she just sort of felt a little bit lost. She wasn't quite in either place. And the old friends, who were kind of fair weather friends, they weren't always mean to her, called her and asked her if she wanted to go to a multi-school dance with them. And she decided to go because she, again, was looking for that sense of belonging that's so important to kids this age. But when she got to the dance, she was standing with these girls that she had gone to school with from kindergarten, and they started talking and saying mean things about a girl on the other side of the room. And, her dress looked like a rug, and just mean, unkind things. She couldn't hear them. But this girl started to get really uncomfortable because she had been in that situation, and she felt really vulnerable, and she kind of left that social group. And the way she described it was that it was like outgrowing a favorite pair of pajamas. She just, it made her so sad to realize she just couldn't relate to these old friends at all anymore. And when she went home, her mom asked her and her dad asked her how the dance was, and she wouldn't even talk to them. She just went in her room and closed the door. And about an hour and a half later, she was still in her makeup and her dress and her heels. She then went into her parents' room, kicked off her shoes, still in her makeup, got into bed in between her parents, and just started to cry. And she was telling me this story, and she was telling me how well her parents handled this, because they didn't tell her, they didn't minimize her concerns, they didn't tell her that she, not to worry about it because she was now at a new school and she didn't have to deal with these kids anymore. She said they just listened to me and let me cry. And then my mom told me a story about when she was a kid and had friend drama, and I thought to myself, if my mom, who's so smart and so awesome, could go through something like this and still be smart and awesome, then I can manage this too. That child ended up having pretty serious issues later on in high school, and she was telling me that she was very open with her parents because she knew they could handle the low yield stuff so well. She was willing to go back to that when she was having a major depression. So if you can really be there for the small stuff, and not just worry about things like grades and behavior and all of those expectations and things you want to teach them, it will pay dividends in the long run.
Right in time. We got 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, don't make it too personal. Anything can feel too personal. It's really amazing. A friend of mine was telling me that her 6th grader, her son, when he was in 5th grade, and even part of 6th grade, he would tell her everything ad nauseum to the point where she was like, please shut up. I have other things I need to do. Like, it would drive her crazy. The good stuff, the bad stuff, the neutral stuff, all of it. And then he hit 7th grade and he stopped talking and he stopped communicating. She called it the grunting phase. She was saying, how is school? And he'd go, that was all she could get. And she was a therapist. So she knew, you're not supposed to be too reactive, all of those things I just mentioned, and it all worked really well with her clients, but none of it worked with her own child. And one day she tweaked her language just a little bit, and instead of saying, what did you learn at school today? She said, what did the teachers teach you? Which is such a tiny change in the language, but so huge for a middle schooler, because what she did was create some emotional distance. And he started talking, and she said to him, you're talking again. What am I doing differently? Is it that I didn't ask as personal question? He was like, yeah. And it really was that small change. So when you're at home and you want to talk about low yield, high yield, any kind of topic with your kids, see if you can find a way to not make it too personal. You can use TV. You can use the news. If there's an article about locker room talk, you can say, what do you think those guys were thinking when they were making those comments? If it's, you don't have to sit them down and say, let's talk about birth control. You can talk about an article about healthcare that's in the paper. My kids, we would have great conversations because they like that awful show, The Bachelor. Have you guys, does everyone here know that show? So, you have this one man who gets to, every night, is choosing which of 25 beautiful women to eliminate. And he kind of sleeps with a bunch of them, and then at the end, he marries one of them, 30 days later. So, my kids would watch the show, and I would yell judgmental remarks at the television. And my kids would tease me. They were in middle school, and they would say, but Mom, it's true love. But it was really, I could have said don't watch the show, but it was actually this great opportunity to have a conversation about what was important to me and what I wanted them to know. Neutral territory. These are some other tricks that might work. If your son loves video games, ask them to teach you how to play a video game. Ask them how to use your computer. Talk to them when you're in the car, and eye contact is optional. Talk to them when you're shooting hoops. Anything you can do to find a time, and then you have to be really patient because the nuggets will eventually come out that they can be far and few between. But even sitting in silence can often be very effective because over time you will get some information. Next is know your triggers. So I was talking to the author, Peggy Orenstein. She wrote Girls and Sex, and then she wrote Boys and Sex. And actually, that's the Q&A that I did today. It's really fascinating. If any of you are raising boys, I highly recommend you can either do the Cliff Notes version and read the Q&A, or you can read her book. But in any case, when I was talking to her for my book, she was the Peggy Orenstein.
There was an interview with her with NPR yesterday.
Yeah, and she also, I think they have an excerpt in the Atlantic too as well. But I've talked to her many times over the years. For my book, I spoke to her as well, and she has a daughter, and she was talking about how she herself had all kinds of body image issues. She had constantly her whole life struggled with body image, and when she had this daughter, she was so afraid that she would infect her daughter with all of the same insecurities and anxieties that she had, and she really didn't want to do it. And she said, I said to my husband, I'm going to let you get in there because you're the one who has some normalcy around food. And I think parents often are insecure. They don't know how to do everything. We're learning and growing with our kids, but it is okay to designate different people or aunts, uncles, neighbors, friends, parents of your kids' friends to help with areas that are triggers for you. Another thing you can do is just process with a friend or a family member. There are certain things that can be more triggering than others. I always tell parents of middle schoolers to anticipate how you would react if your child told you they were gay or that they did not identify with a specific gender. Whether or not you think that's likely to happen, just anticipate now how you would react Kids have told me over the years that what they want from their parents in that moment is simply for them to say, it is okay for you to try on whatever labels you want to try on until you find the one that fits. And they don't want them to say, you're too young to know. So you're not going to make them something or not make them something. If anything, you're just going to make them think they're not okay as they are, which will make them more likely to be a target.
I have a question because I was out with my 12-year-old daughter yesterday, and she was telling me about a classmate named Sky, and how this classmate named Sky is a boy one day and a girl the next day. And I was like, what?
So she probably was talking about gender fluidity and in middle school, because it's this time where kids are discovering their identity. This is when a lot of them like suddenly decide they want to try on a new pronoun, or they're experimenting with their sexuality. You know, it's helpful to just think in advance about how you might handle that. The next is know your own stories. I think our instinct as parents is to shield them from our biggest mistakes. I actually think that we should be doing the opposite. For kids, our lives look like this perfect straight line from point A to point B, and point B is success, and point A is middle school. And they have no idea that we all experience bumps along the way. And the more we can do to talk to them about those situations. Another writer told me that she was really vocal with her kids about the fact that she sent her first book to 13 publishers, and not only did all of them reject that book, but no publisher ever published. And then the last one here is don't make them ask for help. A 7th grader once said to me, don't ever say to a middle schooler, are you okay? If you say to them, are you okay? She said, we're always going to say we're fine, because that's the biggest lie we tell. And then what happens is once they've said they're fine, they feel like they've lost the opportunity. And so really, instead of asking them if they're okay, just observe and say, I can see you're upset, or I can see you might need some support. Let's talk later today, or let's go out and take a walk. But really don't put them in a position of asking you for help if you can help them. And I think I made it to the last slide. There's an expert on resiliency, a physician named Ken Ginsberg, and one of the things that's stuck with me over the years is this quote of his: the wider the gap between who kids are and who kids think they should be, the more they're going to struggle. So we want to make sure that we are unconditionally accepting, that our love is unwavering, and that we're really teaching them how to hold on to optimism. You have to be proactive instead of be reactive or passive in the face of a setback. And we also want to be really, as parents, connecting with one another. Going back to the very beginning when I talked about how that transition to middle school can be isolating for kids. They have to make all new friends and they're dealing with so many changes. It's the same for parents. Often we feel a little bit untethered from our community. One of the things I did in my book is create a discussion guide both for parents and educators. A lot of schools have been using it either to do parent-school partnerships or to be just suggesting that parents do it on their own, and it's a way for parents to come together and talk about some of these issues and retain that sense of community. It doesn't have to be a book club, it could be taking a walk with your friends, but really get to know each other's friends. It will help you. The more adults who love your kids, the better your kids will do. And while we can't be calling, stay really connected and talk about each other's kids, I think we've almost become fragmented, where I now will get calls from a parent who will tell me they're worried about this child who's a friend of their kids, and the situation that will have happened in front of them in their car, and they're also good friends with this other parent, and yet they're calling the school to negotiate it. And I feel like there's so much fear around just being a community and connecting with one another that's really not benefiting kids. And I'll end with a story about one of my favorite stories about because middle school faced so well. This is a guy, a principal in New York. His name is Tom Adams. He's at New Thane Middle School. And so Tom Adams sent me a note through social media. He had seen something I posted where I talked about how instead of asking kids, why they did what they did, why they did that misbehavior. I stumbled upon, but I want to share a story about something that happened at my school where I used that strategy. He had been in the cafeteria and 2 girls had run up to him and said, "Mr. Adams, come quickly. Call her Samantha. Samantha's crying over here." And so this principal went over and what's going on, what happened with Samantha? And they said, well, earlier today, this boy told Samantha that this other boy was going to ask her out. And she was a little dubious because this boy was in, more quote unquote popular crowd. She didn't think this was a kid who would ordinarily have asked her out, but she figured that, she kind of secretly wanted him to, and she liked this boy, and that was excited at the prospect of him asking her out. So she was in the cafeteria, she was in line. A few minutes before, that boy's friend had again told her that this boy was going to ask her out. And in the line, this boy asks her out. And she's still a little, skeptical, but she figures maybe he needs it because she'd been trying to expect it. So she said yes and started to walk back to her table. And by the time she was halfway to her table, she could hear the boys laughing. And then she could hear a whole table of boys laughing. And that's when she broke down and started to cry. So the principal saw red. He thought, who does that? What kind of kid does that to one of their classmates? I can't think of anything more cruel to do to another kid. And he hauled the 2 boys into his office and he started to give them a hard time and ask them, what they were thinking. And in his head, he's thinking, who raised you? And getting really, really heated. And they're just stoic and they're unrepentant and they're unwilling to engage. And then he asked that question, were you your best self? And they suddenly started to cry and they said no. And at that point, they really, were willing to engage. He was able to bring their parents in and talk about what they could do to move forward and help these boys make it right to the extent they could with this goal. And the reason I love that story is because it just highlights so much about the messiness of the phase and how much they really want to please adults and how they want to do the right thing and they want to think of themselves as good, and they are inherently good, but we have to be coaching them and helping them along the way. Thank you.
I think we have a couple minutes for questions. I also wanted to mention that we have 10 books, and maybe 10 minutes afterwards, if anyone wants to buy a book and have it signed. So we do have that.
Yeah, I'll take you.
Yeah, for a few minutes. If anybody wants to, I'll read them out here in a minute. But do you have any questions for Phyllis? Anyone?
I had a question. At what age should a child get a cell phone?
So I have to be totally transparent. I have stood up here and told people that I intended to wait until 8th grade, and last week I got my 6th grader a phone. So I did get him a dumb phone, and he can't do much with it, but you have to know your child. There's no right or wrong answer. I think you want to be very much involved with what they're doing online so you can use mistakes as teaching moments. You want to be sure that they understand they don't actually have any privacy and that you will be spot checking IT. You don't have to read everything, and you really don't want to. It would take all day and all night of every day of the week, but you do want to be looking often enough that you can catch them when something isn't going right ahead. I could tell 1,000 different stories. These kids really need a lot of oversight at this age. And you have to know whether they're ready. I know some 7th graders whose parents have had to take their phone away because it really was going to destroy their social lives. They couldn't handle it. And other kids are really, really able to handle that responsibility.
In your book, is there more explicit examples
In the
strategies?
In the book,
Talking in the beginning about coping strategies.
yes, there's a whole chapter on psychological resiliency. With everything in the book is very concrete. So strategies on everything from learning to social stuff to the psychological stuff.
One last question.
I'm curious about the self-advocacy. And sort of, I love the fact that you're, teaching the kids to reach out and that kind of thing. How do you decide between when the child should actually advocate and when somebody is either I don't know, getting used to it, just complaining about it, because, you don't want to be the fixer, but on the other hand, it sounds like you're not always getting the full story. You have to tease something out.
Yes, one of the things we tell parents at my school at the beginning of the year is every single middle schooler in the course of their time in middle school is going to get in trouble or lie or cheat or be mean. And we really hope that when you get that call, that you'll be open to it and that you will accept this idea that we're partnership and we are trying to work with you to just turn out good, happy, well-adjusted, self-aware kids. So if you are sensing that you have your kid or a kid who is unable to really accurately interpret feedback, I would ask those questions that I've noticed. I'm wondering, I wonder what would happen if you just sat with that for a week and if you didn't call them right away. Can we do that as an experiment? I love suggesting things as an experiment. A design thinker once told me that instead of giving his son a lot of rules around turning the cell phone in during study time, they came up with a plan where he would put it in a sealed envelope. That was the kid's idea. So he felt like it was sort of on him, but he clearly couldn't use it. It was in a sealed envelope. So kids love iteration and experimenting. So I would say that something like, let's do an experiment. I've noticed that you've had this complaint before, it usually resolves itself. So how about we give it a week, or how long do you think you want if we could try waiting this time?
Right. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you If anyone wants to buy a book, we're here.
I would love to buy a book.
Can I buy a book? I want to buy a book, right?
Where's the?
Oh, nice. How are you? You want your to make it
Oh, here it is.
And then we have autograph holders. So whenever you make a
Someone buy a book too.
keep telling the box I'm just signing.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you guys do acting for us and that middle school?
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you so much. Have a Sorry. Nice to see Dad's here. Yeah.
That's it. I think I'm the only. No, one of them.
There's another
Yeah,
couple.
another dude. It's lonely in here.
Well, most of you guys have like a full-time thing going on at work.
Yeah. Actually, it's the other way around. I'm the stay-at-home guy. My wife is a worker, but she's here too. This is a two-man job.
At least, this is the days when your whole family lived with you, grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles.
We never did that. We're a tiny family.
We are too, but I'm talking about like other generations.
Hi. A question for you. I didn't want to take the first one. Are these both supposed to be the same title, or is that a mistake?
It's the same.
More the same. Okay. And on this about staying connected, like people say, I'm working
I know it's hard to
on
let
which I'm okay. The kid comes in and she's looking sad. I have two very different ways to engage. One, sit down my
really want to take your lunch hour.
the other is to maintain some distance. Say, hey, lunch is man, be all late too. What do you do?
I'm part-time, so I'm able to flex.
It's different, but is there a general thinking on dealing with
I'm the other way around. My wife is full-time as a government, and I am